real live one. Yeah.
Today is a day of deep and solemn circumforeignousness. Such exportentious and essentially venial events as the Festival of Surrealisms demand as much grandiloquence and espionage as we can repinely muster. I am not a tintinnabulator, but nor do I aspire.
Yeah, this is a poem about a famous figure in my youth who's not now so well regarded, called Stalin. I'd like to start with a little Stalin thought. Under the wise leadership of Comrade Stalin and the banner of the party, we shall rout out the counter-revolutionary scum, the Trotskyites, Zinovievites, fascist citizens, and lead.
Yeah, it's a real live person for sale. I have my values anyway. Clothing, no extra charge, of course. Buy me now, go on. Buy me now. Save yourself. Get a gnome for your home. Or an angel in a taxi cab. Or a corpse in a London bus.
People in Performance, a 3CR program broadcasting quality performance of music and the spoken word.
Or a fairy in your dairy milking petty cash. All you gotta do is buy me and I'm yours. All yours. No extra charge. And my hair is real, I tell you. It's real. I beat as I sleep, as I dream. You could have me today. No deposit. And I'm interest free too. Interest free. Isn't that enough? Take me and I will love you. Love you. Love you. Love you. And then eat you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm child now.
Once upon a time, a long time, years ago.
To understand Gurdjieff, you will have to drop all your categories.
Strike! Strike! For your freedom. Strike! Strike! Next up, then 1 in 5 goes to work, dinner, work, to armchair and be made. Black land for the taking without buying your trade. They rolled the blacks by stock up and gun.
It's like one of those weeds that swallows insects, and it's hungry.
We have goodbye to white man's world. And finally, the open section. Mystery cliches, breeziness, treasiness, a lost soul.
If ever I should have seen the places you've been, the way that you...
I write this for emptiness. There is no food in my cupboard.
To start off, we have Richard Tipping, who was a prolific Australian poet. All of Tipping's works, including concrete poetry, possess strong, modern Republican sentiment. His song, Don't Sell Your Country Out, was recorded, ironically enough, in a Toorak art gallery last year.
Richard Tipping.
Sitting around quietly getting mind spaced, thinking about human race. So many countries, what's a place? If we take the case of Australia, an English, American, Japanese base, is that culture just a pretty face? Well, if you're gonna do what you gotta do, starting right now, just care about the things that count. Don't let them sell your country out. Australia, you heard the name, no substitute will ever be the same. Independence, our demand, our right. It's only been 200 years. The flags were raised, the bush was cleared, the Aussies marching off to other wars. Aboriginal black, Aboriginal white, we're living in a country close to our hearts, but it's everybody's quarry and farm. Well, if you're gonna do what you gotta do, starting right now, just care about the things that count. Don't let them sell your country out. Australia, you've heard the name, no substitute will ever be the same. Independence, our demand, our right.
You're listening to Melbourne's Community Radio, 837 3CR.
Today, Pip really begins. Robin Archer and David Allen interviews by Ken Smeaton continue. The two stars talk about their life, the concerns they express about life. Pip agrees are not far from our own.
And I would like to read a sound poem. 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 Sound
London bus, or a fairy in your dairy milking petty cash. All you gotta do is buy me and I'm yours, all yours. No extra charge, and my hair is real, I tell you, it's real. I beat as I sleep, as I dream. You could have me today. No deposit. And I'm interest-free too. Interest-free. Isn't that enough? Take me and I will love you. Love you. Love you. Love you. And then eat you. Eat you. Thank 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 you.
evening news, he hears all he needs to. High of 39, strong winds, total fire ban. Tonight he will go through no particular ritual.
People in Performance, a 3CR program broadcasting quality performance of music and the spoken word.
To Melbourne's Community Radio, 837 3CR.
In him the sinner and the sage meet. And even the sin is transformed. In him even the sage is transformed to become a worldly being.
Ken Smeaton recorded this interview with David Allen during July '82, not long after Allen had returned from a quick trip to London to mix his soon-to-be-released latest albums. David's work is on London's Charlie label. David Allen is an Australian poet, musician, performer who, after travelling to Paris in '61, became involved in the Burroughs Ginsberg Machine Poets School. Gong and Soft Machine are two cult psychedelic bands of the '60s that were born out of Allen's musical talent. This interview highlights David's search for truth, meaning, and the poetical way. In this, part 2 of the interview, Ken asked David why he'd left Australia.
Poet for sale, a real live one, yeah. Yes, a real live person for sale. I have my values anyway.
You're listening to Melbourne's Community Radio, 837 3CR.
Melbourne poet Eric Beach recorded live at Montsalvat 81. The poems are La Mama, Chauvinist Talk, and songs like Rivers and Running Streets. Certain words in the poems have been edited out. If you listen carefully, you will hear the exclamations of an interjector and the audience reaction in the background.
This is a satire on local poets. It's called La Mama. Sheldon Lee, it's Old Flies and Eyes. Old Dog Eye and Dead Horse. Reading poetry with a whiskey voice. Sunday night, drunk on applause. Afterwards, he snores. Meantime, it's and money in the hat. And Jeffrey Eggleston, the name of Carlton, on a 10-speed cyclic history somewhere between Johnny's Green Room and Tierra del Fuego. The poem's thick, the poet dense, his back turned to the audience. Half of them leave and half of them go to Johnny's Green Room or Tierra del Fuego. And Pio's popping the mic and someone yells, "I can't make out the words too well. Don't you care that we can't hear?" And Pio says, "No, I don't want to communicate. I just want to express myself." And here's Ken Smeaton, a keen man on safari, and poor Tom, the street poet, shouting Mata Hari, Doppelganger, Hawaiian Burger, Marie, the hairy canary, completely extempore, wow how, bow how, regurgitatum ad nauseam, some hummus. And now this academic, he doesn't deserve a name, accepting a grant from the Literature Board when he doesn't need the money, he needs the fame. He thinks poetry's a branch of anthropology. He's brought back the latest from New Guinea. He's doing the dance of the headless chook. Barry Dickens is shouting, "The hook, the hook." Barry Dickens helped on stage, his hand to his brow. He's got the audience rioting now, so what does he do? 5 minutes ago I had a car accident, and now I'm different. And taken off the poet who went before, Self, Part 4. A gig for Melbourne's Patti Smith. She weaves, she's pissed, she spins, she's stoned, she's independent and on the phone. She's creating a no man's land out there. She's fighting the fight against underwear, a colourful life in a monotone. And finally, the open section, mystery cliches, breeziness, treasiness, a lost soul in midri, footloose and footscray, on the only one alone. This is my book, published by my auntie. My birth is my nascent. My life's out on loan. My death's overdue. Where appropriate, groan.
Now let's go back a few years. Can you remember the first address you had for living room?
Bridge Road, Richmond.
In Bridge Road in Richmond.
Yes.
And who did, now this would have been
84.
84. Who were some of the poets or?
Well, some are going to be more notable than others. The important thing about it was not who were the stars, but the fact that every type could get on that stage and read whatever they had or recite it. And you can get your truckie come in his singlet and his little bit of paper and read his poem. So in the other room I have a lot of drawings I did of poets. Quite a few, and perhaps, no, none of those are necessarily the stars, shall we say. Tom, of course, ran the Saturday night reading, and that went very, very well for quite a while.
What was the idea of making it open for anybody to read?
Well, I think we have to say that was Tom doing that. But he did it with me aiding and abetting him, certainly. Because in living room, this is where I talk about what living room was. I created it to create a space in which the audience was listening. I'd come back from Paris where audiences listen, no matter how much they drank, to a country where in 1984, if the audience was drinking, they misbehaved. And the performer was often open season. And so I wanted to create a space where the audience knew what they were there for. So the coffee and cakes were out the back, open fire. The space was set up as a theatre. I modified that at times, but the seats were lined up, so when people walked in, they go, yeah, we're here to listen. The jazz musicians that played there said, the audience is listening. Yes. But the other thing I did, much to some people's disgust, I eliminated smoking in the space. In the whole building, no marijuana and no alcohol. Now the next venue that I created somewhere else, I allowed alcohol, a little bar, a limited bar, but I made the right decision in '84 not to allow alcohol. And it was quite impressive when on one night, Komnenos, Servos and I threw out a person who thought he had a right to have a whacking big flagon of red out the back. He wasn't amused. And I have to throw this in. I thought it was hilarious because I took his flagon of red and I'm carrying it and I come through necessarily the stage where Benny Zabel, in his skeleton outfit,
Yes.
remember?
Yes, Benny Zabel.
Well, I'm going, he's doing stuff about peace and not war, and I'm flying through saying, at the time it was Kevin calling him, so he changed to Komnenos later, and I'm saying, Kevin, and this bloke's coming tearing behind me, Shelton Lee, after his booze, grabbing my shawl and tearing it, yes. I'm doing him an injustice. It was actually Patrick Macaulay, who in those days was very aggressive and later changed completely.
We won't go into it here, but Patrick has...
Well, you can edit it out.
Oh, yes, yeah. He was running a venue and...
Patrick?
Yeah.
Where?
In Gertrude Street. He ran a venue for a while, a bit later in the 80s, in Gertrude Street.
But you see, I remember in Jammin, Lauren doing her first poem in public. But she says it was Living Room and myself that gave her her first reading. I don't actually remember that. But I saw her as a 17-year-old in Jammin with Pamela Sidney, her mother. And it's quite wonderful to see how they develop, and I'm not being patronising. Thing is, you see, and this is a bit of a hobby horse of mine, when you see the work of very young and you think perhaps it's not great, you better support it because over the next 10 years they're going to be winning awards. They're going to be doing very well. And what starts slowly can bear fruit beautifully. Yeah. But Pamela Sidney, yeah. Do you remember White Feather?
Yes, very well. I'm fond of that woman too.
Carmel Bird is up here.
Yes.
Well, I've got an old poster I did for her, a publicity sheet. God Smokestrom. Do you remember God Smokestrom?
Yes.
That was Living Room.
Okay, and Carmel Bird was a regular reader there?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you think of any of the other older female poets like Joyce Lee or Barbara Giles, Judith Rodriguez, any of those read there, or did you have a feature?
They did.
Yeah. Did you?
And Glenn Thomasine would come and sit in the audience. Yeah, she would. She was wonderful. But I mean, I've got visual stuff in there of Malcolm
Brodie?
Malcolm Brodie. Stephen Whiteside.
Yes.
He was and is a fully qualified GP. I've got some publicity material I did for him. Patrick Brian Cox.
Yes.
Remember him? He used to sit in the front row and he would nod off. And I'm trying to remember, who was it that was stark naked on the stage?
These are the things I'll take away with me. I can list them all by name. I got a lot of practice when the fires came. The first time I was ready, had my suitcase packed to go, but I left half of everything behind in the panic. I didn't know. The second time was bitter, choosing what to lose. So many things to say goodbye to, gave me the fire blues. The third time was the cleanest. Everything went to plan. I hit that highway with my life in a white Toyota van. Kept right on going past the turn off into town. But I came home and 2 months on my suitcase. Turn off into town. If I drove on till the morning, I wouldn't turn around. These are the things I'll take away with me. I've chosen what to lose. Just one thing to say goodbye to, the fire blues. These fire
One morning I was waiting for the bus and watched some birds catch worms in the park. I felt sad I couldn't do much for them. I felt wonder at them being still in the wild. I felt fear of perhaps one day having to live in the park myself. I was on my way to work. I caught the bus. I left the birds behind in the park. There were 2 of them, listening to worms crawl on the ground. I thought of my sister and me worrying about the traffic noise when we were little. They were listening to worms in Australia like they do in Europe. I was watching birds in the park. I was on my way to work. I was watching birds, listening to worms under the grass. There was 2 of them, it was a pair. They were European birds in a European type park. And they were a pair, they were in the wild. I felt I wanted to know them. I caught the bus to work. I left the birds behind in the park. There was two of them, there were a pair. They were catching worms on the grass. There were European birds, blackbirds. They were listening to worms crawl about. They were together, but listening each on their own. They were listening to worms underneath the grass over the roar of the traffic. They were together, they were on their own. They were together, they were on their own. I caught the bus to work. I felt I wanted to know them. They were in the wild. There were European birds in the Australian wild. They were listening to worms underneath the grass over the roar of the traffic. They were wild European birds, still hearing the worms crawl on the ground. They were European birds in a European-type pack, listening to worms. They were wild birds from Europe in a European-type pack, listening to worms, each on their own, but together over the roar of the traffic. I caught the bus to work. I left the birds behind in the pack.
Communos Zeros knows all about it. Once a coffee shop proprietor in Lonsdale Street in the heart of Melbourne's Greek community, Communos began writing poetry some 8 years ago. Today he can be found performing his work in cafes, factories, prisons and schools. He has published 3 collections of his writing and has released a record of his performance poetry. Communos has done it his way.
I'd like to start off with a poem which is very close to me. It's about my childhood in Richmond. I remember my childhood in the back streets of Richmond and the visions that leave a lasting impression, where I lived in a fish shop with my mother and father, and the chips and the grease and the smell and the batter and the stench from the garbage and the thousands of flies that would gather to feast on the shop's throwaways in the lane out the back where we kids used to play. And from our 10 by 12 playground built over the kitchen, we could see all the tin rooftops of Richmond, and the chimneys and smokestacks that were nearby was the sight you could see as you looked at the sky. And the trees you could see, you could count on one hand, and the birds must have flown off to some other land. And my dad, who left Greece when he was 15, with his hope, his ambitions and a bag full of dreams, but spent the rest of his life as a slave to a stove, till his dreams were all greasy, and his hope had all gone. And my mum, who'd pace up and down to the kitchen, taking orders and trays of roasters and boilers, and flake and cooter and brim and snapper, to the window to attract the eyes of the buyers. And she carried the burden of my father's bad temper when the shop wasn't doing what it should have. Oh, he was worried at the price of potatoes, and her nerves were internal, but her anger was showing, and her legs would swell up from all of that walking, and I often saw her in some corner crying in the fish shop in Richmond from where I came.
Komnenos Zervos, performance poet, street poet, social realist poet, Greek poet, Australian poet, and currently writer-in-residence at Broadmeadows Technical School in Melbourne's western suburbs. During 1987, he was one of a group of professional writers who worked with students in the area to produce the Broady Book of Stories, an anthology of children's writing. Could you give me a bit of background to the Broady Book of Stories?
Sure. It was funded through a process called the Disadvantaged Schools Project, and 9 schools got together and decided to collect stories and poems from students in those 9 schools, and they employed 8 authors to go into those schools for 2 weeks, talking to the students about how they write, why they write, and encouraging the kids to write their own stories and to submit them to the Broady Book of Stories. So it was just a sort of a community education exercise, but it's done more than that. It's created at least 118 people, young people now, who think of themselves as writers and who are in a published publication which is being read by other people. And and this further experience of being writer-in-residence funded by the Australia Council is backing up those writers, so it's not just a one-off event. I get to see those kids who are in the book.
This is how I see our economy as. Richer people, Turok people, stuck-up snobs, poorer people, northern suburbs, blue-collar workers, small houses, huge houses, better clothes, designer clothes, Target clothes, Kmart clothes, people looking down at other people, blue-collar kids, but also better kids, better personalities, fine schools, dumpy schools, $1,000 semesters, fine uniforms, no uniforms, cheaper books, no books, but I don't care, I'm happy being a blue-collar kid anyway.
Really good. What subject we're going to pick is going to be differences. Now, in this world, everyone's different in some way or another. When I was a kid and growing up, I was different because my family was Greek and I was being brought up in an Australian society. And at home they wanted me to act like a Greek kid. And at school, all my friends were Australian and they lived by an Australian set of standards. I was also different because I was fat and most kids were thin. And I used to cop a lot of crap about that as well. Because I used to be called chubby, and I used to be called tubby, and I used to be called barrel, and I used to be called fatso, and all sorts of things, as well as wog and Greek and etc. When I first started writing, I started investigating these differences. And here's a poem I wrote. I thought to myself, when I was about 30, 31, I wrote this poem, and I thought to myself, what happens if my name would have been Smith, Brown or Jones in this country, instead of Komnenos Zervos? And I think things might have been a bit different when I was growing up. Although things are not so bad now, when I was growing up, there was a greater emphasis on being like a good, typical Australian, okay? And I was obviously not a typical Australian because I was from a Greek background. So I wrote this poem trying to work that kind of thing out. It goes like this. If I was the son of an Englishman, I'd really be an Aussie. I could be a High Court judge or an actor on the telly. I could even be Prime Minister or a co-star with Skippy. If I was the son of an Englishman, I'd really be an Aussie. But my father eats salami, and my mother, she wears black. My last name's Papadopoulos, my first name's just plain Jack.
To what extent has your Greek background influenced your poetry, your writing?
Well, in the subject matter of my poetry, my very early stuff, I went thoroughly into investigating that, my background. I was trying to work out my identity. It doesn't influence it so much now. I'm influenced more by the factors that influence all people in society, and that's the world politics, the economic system in this country, where I am in that scale of economics, the jobs I do, the effects of noise pollution, of living in a big city, of growing up in a big city, of growing up in a television generation. All those things affect me much more than my ethnicity now. You might call me a wog and I might call you a skippy, but we've all got to live in the same city, and we've all got to work to make our bread, and we've all got to work to wear dead. Right now I'm getting inspiration from the kids I'm working with. I'm concerned that a lot of people have been turned off writing as an entertainment form. I try to make it as entertaining as possible and perform at entertainment venues. Recent poems have looked at my friends and the lifestyle that they lead. My friends were born after the year zero, the year Hiroshima burnt, the year man proved there was no God. My friends grew up with television sets as babysitters, suckled by advertising and Disney cartoons. My friends hailed the Beatles as the new messiahs and rock and roll as the new religion, only to be exploited by their church. My friends danced the Mekong Delta Boogie and the Tet Offensive Rock. My friends thought they were living in England until 1972 and knew definitely they were living in the USA in 1975. My friends hold placards, march for peace the city streets, in government-monitored demonstrations, knowing that the powerful will not give up that power without a fight.
What do you think are the major concerns of your poetry now, then?
Oh, well, you know, life in general. Just issues that affect people, particularly political issues at a personal level. That's where I think my inspiration for my poetry is now, where politics are brought down to one-to-one situation. And seeing myself in that political situation and laughing at myself too. This one is sort of a parody. Look, up in the sky, it's a bird, it's a plane. No, it's Super Wog, Strange visitor from a European country with powers and abilities far beyond those of normal Anglo-Saxons. Who can gut and fillet mighty man-eaters, pick up hot dim sims in his bare hands, faster than a squirt of vinegar, more powerful than tzatziki, able to use the lifts in tall buildings, and who, disguised as Con Pappas, mild-mannered fishmonger at a great metropolitan shopping centre, fights a never-ending battle against McDonald's, Kentucky Fried, and the American takeaway. Thank you.
Caravan is crossing as I sleep. Many men, oasis bound. A stagger of camels and tired desert pirates. Snorted out through each dry nostril.
Australia. Oh, Australia, I have seen in your bellies roar that there's nothing downwind and the country's offshore. What have you done with your mind-led recovery, your destabilised dollar? Your people are grim and your humour's gone out the same door others' money's come in. Where now are the glad givers of the rape of our rivers, those impertinent soldiers made absurd by the black man's dance on his river's curve? And we arrived on these shores like shell-shocked pink angels just after a storm. And deep down in Sydney, where the traffic's roar and a Saturday night is stilled by the heartbeat of the city's poor, the bone moon shines, shedding a light that is thin through a sky that's as large as an idiot's grin. But me, I love the alleys and the highways, the streets where it always rains, the parky-darkies round their campfires and the dreamings of Fitzroy, the scud of clouds across the desert's brutal sky, the lap of words against our gentle shores. And there were wheat cottages, their tarpaulined corners turned through which a lad could slip with his boy's young loins. And deep in the wheat a journey began through this place that we call a common land. From Toorak through Fitzroy, from reform school through jails, from deserts to seas to Cherbourg, Redfern to Wong and Sale, this land has been trod by a sod with a poem, whose voice wants to speak of the Australia he's known. Of this land of fences and diatribes, where distances cannot be described by maps. But that is the matter of this country where we dwell, a place where the stars are as close as a smile, where the winds are not tempests but a spell in the weather, where no longer our dreams are of penny ice creams but McDonald's that cost you $1. And are we to be reduced to anecdote, the time when, the time where, rather than now? Alone where we stand is a beggar's land, where the black fellas dreaming could give us a hand, for this is our black...
Is 14 years old. Inaccurate conception. The bedroom door is very closed. It is a fact. The mother stands with fists raised for the first knock. The child on the other side is still believing, headphones clamped to damp skull, her soul's hymen intact. This is the first fuck. It begins. Knock, knock, hello? I had not heard again, and when she touched my bare arm, the jerk back to earth was quick. My mother was in my bedroom. The door was down. Good girl always, I opened my legs before the act, the fact of impalement. She says, this afternoon, Dr. Roche, an appointment. Who? For who? You're out such a lot, don't see much of you. Your parents were responsible, just got to know. Is this ecstasy? I observe the soft curve of an aging neck, the fine shine of nuclear eyes. She says there's a seed in me they need to locate. She says don't look so innocent because parents have to know. The ritual demand my warm, cringing blood, thrust instruments inside, invade my half-formed sense of self. I am their child bride. They came for me. I had known they would come. I said nothing as I walked between them. They held hands in the waiting room. I sat alone, awed at being chosen, being virgin, being implanted with some terrible seed as I had slept in my small blue bed. Moments later, behind dusty white screen, Dr. Roche and them on the other side. It may be a fact. And I pissed their answer into cold steel dish. She says there's a seed they need to locate. I say hatred is elusive, no matter the method or how securely implanted.
Just out of town, with a mother who drank and no father around. 16 years old and she'd sing like a bird as she hung out the washing and swept up the dirt. She wore rayon and nylon and denim like they were cashmere. From the ground, the girl went a-walking one night at sundown. Two boys in a ute drove her into town. They took her to bars and they got her to dance. They knew they got lucky and they took their chance. She wore rayon and nylon and denim like they were cashmere, real silk and fine linen. She wore her hair down and instead of a crown, a circlet of daisies she plucked from the ground.
For Barrett Reed, a scholar and a gentleman, and there's not many of us left. It is you that is the dangerous one, hugging the curves of your love of art with the speed of your need for new libraries, places where the heart could rule with the brain. It is you who rides the wild poet's curves, ministering at the crash sites of the absurd, suffering the loneliness of the written word. It is you that is strong for those who lag, and who found the dangerous crim with a poet's song.
In 1973 there was a military dictatorship in power in Greece, and 10,000 students at the Athens Polytechnic, students not so much older than you, decided to hold a sit-in in demonstration against the Papadopoulos regime. After 3 days of their sit-in and defying the army and the military regime, the army called in the tanks and 46 students were killed. Now, sometime later, that military dictatorship was removed from power in Greece. But in the same year, in 1973, I was getting married in Australia in a traditional Greek way, and the two events are interrelated, as this poem will show. The tanks rolled through the streets. I was worrying about guest lists. The crowds that gathered outside were all dispersed. The bridesmaids' dresses were white with red stripes. Those who remained inside the Polytechnic were hungry and cold and needing inspiration. The bombonieras were our design with matching place cards and invitations. For 3 days they were calling for bread, education and freedom. They were singing, Otethayini, Otethayini, Xasteria. They screamed down with the junta, down with Papadopoulos, out with American bases. They broadcast messages to the nation, urging the people to support them, to defy the curfew, to take to the streets. We married at St Constantine and Helen's, photos in the Alexandra Gardens, and then the reception. They served a seafood cocktail, a crumbed whiting entree, and a choice of chicken or beef. We presented our speeches, did our dances, and had bombalaska for sweets. The tanks rolled into Athens on the third night. They all said the bride looked lovely in white. The students were going to be taught a lesson. We were carried at the head of the wedding procession. They stormed the buildings, broke through the gates, armour firing in the dark of night, students screaming, taking flight. Not many remained, not many survived. Their protest was over, their blood had been shed. We were driven to the hotel, booked into the bridal suite, opened the champagne, our wedding night. We now had a licence, everything was all right. Only we had remained. We turned out the light. The virgin's blood had stained the bed. The massacre in 1973 heralded the end of a military dictatorship in Greece. The marriage in 1973 heralded the beginning of a new one in Cuba. Chile, El Salvador, Poland, Afghanistan, the Philippines, and all dictatorial regimes. Mount Waverley, Sunshine, Paran, Abbotsford, Broadmeadows, and all dictatorial regimes.
Here we are at Broadmeadows Technical College, commonly called Broady Tech. And we have an odd couple, the odd couple. Miss Beverly Roberts, who is the Victoria Ministry of Arts Literature Field Officer, and Commodore Servos, who, as he says himself, after being anointed in salt vinegar and wrapped in butcher's paper from a fish and chip shop, young Commodus was bundled off to school and labelled Kevin, so that his school friends wouldn't think he was different. They're quite wrong. Beverly, might I ask you, because I know you're a poet, and a very good poet, and you've written several books of poetry, and I've read them, but what is a literature field officer?
I've spent a lot of time answering that question in the 6 months since I've had the job.
Don't be evasive.
The literature field officer, this is a new appointment in Victoria. It has a very broad brief to really be a kind of living resource for writers of all kinds throughout Victoria.
You're a living resource for all writers.
That's right. I am kindly provided by the Victorian Ministry for the Arts and Literary Arts Board of the Australia Council to service writers throughout Victoria, to promote writing.
Well, is this boy from the fish and chip shop in Richmond one of the writers you're servicing?
Certainly.
Commodus, salt and vinegar, fish and chips.
Yeah.
And writer in residence at Broady Tech.
That's right.
What kind of a social trajectory is that?
both areas they call a wog a wog.
Here, in Broadmeadows?
Of course they do, they're up front.
But I've seen you performing in front of these kids, they actually like your work.
That's right, it's strange, isn't it?
And it's poetry.
Yeah, well, it seems to be an experience they seem to relate to. They have very difficulty in relating to the classics or to English verse, classical literature, but they seem to be interested in what's happening to them now. I'm putting poetry and I'm putting verse into a modern context, and they seem to be enjoying it.
What if I put the proposition to you, quite firmly, that this is obviously not poetry? I mean, it's not poetry as I was taught poetry at school. It's not poetry that the academics, the intellectuals, the people of high sensibility believe in. It's slang, there's a, you know...
Yeah, it's pretty
You think
low,
it's poetry?
Well, I do, yeah. I think poetry is what sounds good, language that sounds good, and finding beauty in the language. And if I can find beauty in ordinary things, if I can find beauty in the things that young people like the ones that I'm teaching have to say, I'll write it down and I'll call it poetry. And they think it's poetry too.
And Miss Roberts here, who's working with the Ministry of Art, supports all this.
I certainly do, and I would have thought that even an elitist like yourself would have supported the idea of introducing an appreciation of writing, appreciation of literature, through direct experience in schools in the way that Commonos is doing it.
Before there were academics, there was poetry being written. Before there was anyone to write them down on a piece of paper or to print them, there was poetry being spoken. Poetry is an oral tradition that goes back to before teachers, before academics, before...
Yes, but I'm questioning whether it's poetry. You say performance poetry. Poetry is not for performance, it's for the mind.
I'm addressing issues and I'm speaking to them, to people in a language which is accessible. But I'm addressing issues that are just as important as issues that other people in literature in the past have addressed. Issues stay very much the same. The form and the style of expression change through the years, I should imagine. I impress upon the young people that I teach too, that if they do want to go on to study the classics, then they first have to develop an appreciation of the art form. And that's what I'm trying to do, is make them appreciate the art form. And the chimneys and smokestacks that were nearby was the sight you could see as you looked at the sky. And the trees you could see, you could count on one hand, and the birds must have flown off to some other land.
What do you think of that guy?
He's a down-to-earth bloke. He doesn't go on with all this other stuff, you know. He speaks realistic.
What about his dirty language? Barbara, what do you think about that? Horrible, I thought it was. Didn't upset you?
No.
What about this older student here? How long have you been in the class, son?
About 3 years, I think I've been here. And I've quite enjoyed his poetry. I reckon it's really good. It talks, it's normal language. It uses the language that people normally use. And it's not very complex. It's not. It relates to things that are normal, part of everyone's daily existence.
Well, Kimberly, I mean, what about the performance? What did you enjoy about it?
I don't know, I just liked it.
You just liked it. What about you, Darren? I mean, are you going to keep writing?
No, maybe.
Huh?
Maybe. Depends if the teachers make me. Otherwise I won't.
But what about the poem you wrote for Commonos? I mean, he didn't make you do that, did he?
No, the English teacher did.
Like, he's done poetry before, like most English teachers haven't. Like
Right,
that.
yeah.
I've always done it, you know.
What do you mean he knows your language?
Well, he writes poems the way kids talk.
So
As
he's
kids
really,
talk. And he can tell you what, you know, if you've done wrong or not.
I mean, he's really got your language there and he can show you what to do with it.
And the chimneys and smokestacks that were nearby was the sight you could see as you looked at the sky. And the trees you could see, you could count on one hand, and the birds must have flown off to some other land.
mind where we stand as a beggar's land, where the black fellas dreaming could give us a hand. For this is our black brothers' country. Its bruises and wounds are now theirs, for we have made this land untenable for even the poor on the stairs. Look around you, brothers, to Leichhardt, poor buggers they were, chewing green leather sample bags and diamond in sight of a Murray camp. They say that Blacksland, Wentworth and Lawson were the first to traverse that rugged blue mountain range, but the Koori had used the hieroglyphs of wallaby maps and the echidnas scratched calligraphy to show the way. Long before the Governors' foot had trod this scrub, the dreaming tracks were made.
When it comes to love, I'm an expert. I specialize in broken hearts. I got a trade school ticket in plumbing. The depth's got a license to cry in the dark. I got certificate for in unrequited longing. Got the know-how and I got the tools. I'm a paid-up card-carrying lifetime member of the Union of Romantic Fools. I got a graduate diploma in goodbyes and running away. I got a bachelor degree in bachelors with an honours in watching TV. I got an MA in holding on way too long. I got a PhD in the blues. I'm a paid-up card-carrying lifetime member of the Union of Romantic Fools. Provide the contact details of several referees. I'm looking for full-time, but I'll take part-time. Casuals, okay, I'll even volunteer, 'cause my career ain't going nowhere. I got nothing to show for my time. I failed the test on picking the rich ones. I flunked the unit on lying. I skipped marriage and divorce, the gold digging course. I never hung out for money or jewels, 'cause I'm a paid-up card-carrying lifetime member of the Union of Romantic Fools.
Ken, give me a bit of the history of yourself. Tell me Ken's making story.
I like the effect of the open poetry venue. I like the big net. Pretty well made some strong decisions that I was going to concentrate my energies on the street poetry level. So I printed poetry with Tom. We printed thousands of sheets. We handed out thousands upon thousands of verse and worse in Swanson Street.
Okay, now tell us then, briefly, about setting up the spelling print.
Well, basically I was goaded. I set up this year's festival that I did because almost in spite of Fringe, been my perception anyway, that the open poetry venue and the kind of people it represents, the kind of people it tries to attract, we weren't taken seriously basically, even though our poetry venues were going week in, week out for many years, that we were actually having poets featured at our venues who are very serious poets, who are well-published poets, and of great benefit to the new and raw poets who will come to an open venue. And I went to a forum last year at the Punters Club after the Fringe festival and really basically got it all off my chest. So after that forum they sent me a letter and said, well, if that's your opinion, why don't you do something about it? So I thought, okay. First of all, I came up with the idea for the nightclub poets, but we called it Divas and Dadas, in the beginning to feature the very best of what we thought were the best performance poets. It grew from that into being an exposition. Eric Beach came up with the name Nightclub Poets. It seemed a bit more apt. That was all very well. We got a grant to do that from the Feds. That's the Literature Board of the Australian Council. But it didn't, still, we weren't covering enough poets. There are people like Shelton Lee who wasn't really apt in a situation like Nightclub Poets. There was the Rochester Poets, the weekly venue, and I wanted to do something for them too. I wanted to actually make it a real poetry festival where all the people I was involved with on many different levels of poetry were covered and given expression and a bit of publicity during the festival. So we came up with a Poetry Cup, which was modelled exactly on the Launceston Cup, which is a fantastically successful public and popular event. And that we had that at the Rochester. It's a beautiful event and it went off really well. And Shelton Lee, the Radical Poets, was really the top end of fun. I mean, once you've set up it's hard to think of a context that really suits Shelton Lee and his beautiful, rather anarchistic approach, and so the Radical Poets at the Punters Club was perfect, as you'll see from the film, the footage that's been shot of that.
It's hard talking soft when you're talking to a beat. It's hard being cool when you're burning from the heat.
It was written by Rupert Murdoch, and this one is called Trash. Just keep taking the tabloid.
Her backbone lurches from her body like Ayers Rock from the desert old redskin centre of Australia.
Me, that is poet, worked with percentage, that is shoe salesman.
Shot in cotton, 7 bullets in his skull. Knew he would die, so he tried to hand himself into custody.
In my bopping days, I wanted to look like you. I couldn't look like Diana Dawes. She was too old, and my mother said she was common, and she had tits you could call tits.
Wander around until you find some land that you really like the look of. Then put your flagpole in the ground and say in a loud and official voice, I claim this land.
How many poets have been involved in this overall? Well, overall we had 18 poets involved in nightclub poetry. There were 36 contestants in the Poetry Cup, and there are about 30 readers in Shelton Lee. So that's, and then there were poets who were on crew and support, so about 100 people really were closely affected by this festival. And for that, I must admit, I do feel pretty happy because it's not one person that does these kind of things. It's a lot of work for a lot of people, and I think the poetry scene in Melbourne has really got a big boost off this.
What's the future of performance poetry in Melbourne?
There's no doubt that performance poetry is one of the directions that poetry is going to go, just because talented people have the energy and the enthusiasm, and because it's highly entertaining, and also because, as far as I can see, it's no real threat to literature. It's an adjunct, a new arm of literature. I think performance poetry's future is splendid, really.
Beautiful.
What sort of news do we really want to hear? That the sky has fallen? That the flash of a lady's eyes has come whizzing around the corner of our lives? That everything about us is motorised? A pause for breath and start again. Did you hear that a song fell from the trees like morning blessings swept up on the lips of waking? That your hair fell upon the pillow in cascade? And that busts of Lenin are being remanded for the wrong reasons? That while the Berlin Wall's torn down, others more subtle are being raised? And did you know that dew has touched your cheeks? That there's murder in Iran? That in Iraq's a half-assembled giant gone of God and Allah's always praised? that your hair is red, burnished like a Raphael, your eyes green pools in a sun-filled summer glade. And Beirut has fallen to its knees once again, and 2 Australians are blown away by accident, the latest folly of the IRA. Clouds frog march across the sky. You lay like a question mark upon the sheets, as smooth as stone. The tea steams lazily. You sip dreams. At Wodonga, a thick fog has covered the Hume, and you are an ocean rolling waves in my head that has tossed you up naked, lying washed up on my bed.